So I have about 3 decades of experience working in business school admissions, and previous to UC Davis, I was at the University of Michigan Ross Business School, the NYU Stern School of Business, as well as the Yale School of Management. I've spent the last 15 years here at UC Davis identifying the next generation of talent that we enroll each year. During that time, I've read over 25,000 applications for admission. Yes, that's right, 25,000 applications for admission. And I'm here today to share with you some of my expertise in that area and talk to you a little bit about what we're looking for in a candidate. Before we get started, I wanted to mention to you some upcoming webinars that we have, as well as a webinar recording that may be of interest to you. These are available on our website, and I will also make sure that we send you a copy of the links when we send you an email after this session. Okay. So I want to start off by talking about what are the parts of the application. Our application form is pretty straightforward, fairly typical. You can see resume, recommendation, essays, transcripts, test scores, application fee, application form. These are things that you would see in most applications for business school where you were applying for admission. Today we're going to talk about these 3 in more depth. We're going to talk about transcripts. We're going to talk about the Graduate Management Admissions Test and Graduate Record Exam, as well as the Test of English for Foreign Language, or the International English Language Testing System. And that applies to individuals who are non-native English speakers. So let's get started. When we talk about admission to the MBA program, our admissions committee considers applications on a holistic level. What does that actually mean? What it means is we look at the entire profile of a candidate. We're looking at, obviously, how well their academics are, looking at both previous academic work as well as test scores. We're looking at their professional promise, and that's looking at both what have they done previously before applying to the program in the workplace, as well as what are the goals that they've set for themselves and what are their plans after business school. And then we're also looking at personal qualities. Now, this is something that's important to us as a business school because as a collaborative community, having strong interpersonal skills, a commitment to others, valuing working together with other people is important to us, and we are very much looking for that in our candidates. I'm going to jump ahead, and we're going to jump right into transcripts, and I'm going to talk about it from the point of view of what do we need from you, and then talk more about how we use that information once we get that. So we do need transcripts from all universities that you've attended. So that would include obviously your undergraduate degree, any graduate degrees that you may have pursued, but it also includes summer courses you may have taken, courses you may have taken after business school, after your undergraduate studies. It would also include coursework that transferred to your undergraduate degree that were counted on your transcript. Essentially, if you went to school there, we want to see a transcript for you. For your application for admission, you can submit unofficial transcripts for all of your transcripts. In other words, a photocopy of what you have uploaded as part of your application is enough for the admissions committee to evaluate you for admission. Once you're enrolled in the program, we do need official transcripts. And what does that mean as far as official? Official means that it was issued from the institution itself, typically in a sealed envelope that was sent directly to the university, or if it was sent to you, the envelope remained sealed and you sent it to us in a sealed envelope as well. Beyond that, the timing for when these need to come in would be before you enroll in the program. So for example, if you're applying for fall 2019, we should have your transcripts, your official transcripts, by September 2019. Okay. Once we get those transcripts, what do we do with them? Well, one of the things that you will often see reported by schools is the average undergraduate GPA for their students. And certainly the GPA is important. It gives us a quick sense of what your overall academic performance looks like. But when we're evaluating candidates for admission, we look at it much more closely than just the GPA. We look at the classes you've taken, what was the level, did you take mostly introductory courses, or did you take more advanced courses as part of your studies? Were there patterns in your performance? Did you maybe get off to a weaker start, but as time progressed, your grades got better? Maybe you had a rough semester or a rough year because of something that was going on outside of class. And overall, we're also looking to see what was your overall performance in those classes. You know, did you get mostly A's, mostly B's? Was there a mixture? What was your overall experience in the classroom, and how is that reflected in your performance overall? One point I want to mention as far as the classes taken, because an MBA program does require quantitative ability, we do pay particular attention to quantitative courses that you've taken. These could include basic statistics classes, could be calculus, could be a microeconomics course, and other quantitative classes that you've taken. And students who've done well in those courses, it's a good predictor for us that they'll be able to handle the quantitative rigors of our MBA program. And then the second thing we're looking at is what is the rigor of the program and the classes and the school itself that you attended. A student who did, let's say, biochemistry at UC Davis versus a student who did basket weaving at Timbuktu University. Obviously, the biochemistry is going to be a much more rigorous program, and we think is a better predictor of performance in our program. So when we're looking at your transcript, it's not just looking at the final GPA. We really are reading it like a book and trying to get an understanding of what kind of a student you would be in our program. I do want to make a special note for students who were educated outside the US, or any student, frankly, who attended a school that doesn't use a typical 4.0 grade point average evaluation. So when students are applying from outside the US, most typically they are not on a 4.0 scale. And we have access to information, we have experts in-house where we are able to take that information on your performance in your school and evaluate that. We don't convert it to a 4.0 GPA, but we do get a good assessment of how strong are you as a student within your program and your school. The other thing I wanted to share with you about transcripts was we recognize that sometimes there are factors outside of your school that affect your performance in your classes. And even though the University of California does require a 3.0 grade point average for admission to graduate study, we are able to make exceptions based on information that candidates share with us. So if your grade point average is below a 3.0, we ask that you use your optional essay to tell us what happened. Sometimes it's because you took a gap year. You needed some time to refocus your studies. It could be that you were looking for an opportunity to change majors. Maybe you got off on a slower foot and you wanted to be able to refocus your studies. So if there was something outside of class, it could be work, it could be a family issue, please tell us about it. It helps us in understanding what kind of a student you will be in our program. And I will tell you, the admissions committees are very forgiving. We just need you to share that information with us. So that covers transcripts. Again, we read it like a book. We use it as an opportunity to understand what kind of a student you might be in the program, and it helps us evaluate your academic potential for the program. The other thing that they do is, the other thing that we look at is the GMATs. And so for the GMAT or the GRE, we're looking at assessing your academic readiness. As you might imagine, there's a lot of variation across academic institutions. And I mentioned sort of the difference between biochemistry at UC Davis versus basket weaving at Timbuktu University. And for us, the GMAT is a way for us to measure a person's academic potential on a more level playing field. We also accept the GRE, and frankly, we have no preference between the two. It's really an opportunity for you to give us some additional information about your academic readiness for our MBA program. Then as you think about the GMAT and the GRE, a couple of things. One is, how do you sign up? Like most things these days, the web is available. For the GMAT, you would go to mba.com, and for the GRE, you would go to ets.org/GRE. They use slightly different score ranges, and we are familiar with both of them, so we are able to actually use either score equally well. There is a slight price differential between the GMAT and the GRE, so some people may choose to take the GMAT because of the familiarity in the MBA program world. Other people may choose to take the GRE because they can use it for other graduate programs as well, and because the cost is a little bit lower. In both cases, they use what's called a computer adaptive test, or a CAT. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, what that means is based on how you answer your first question, honestly, whether you get it right or wrong, the next question will either be more difficult or less difficult. And as you answer more difficult questions, you are receiving more points towards your final score. As you answer less difficult questions, your scores the points will be less. So the idea really is to give you an opportunity to adjust how you are answering your questions and then having that play into which questions you're being asked next. An important thing to be aware of is that with the GMAT, once you've answered a question, you cannot go back and change it. So for those of you who did those little bubble forms where you filled in an answer sheet and could go around and sort of skip around to answer your questions, that's not possible with the computer adaptive test. It is possible under limited circumstances to go back and change some answers with the GRE, but generally speaking, we recommend that you go ahead and go through the questions one by one without the expectation of being able to go back. So I want to take a minute now and just give you a quick example of what a GRE score looks like and what a GMAT score looks like. We'll start here with the GMAT. You'll see, first of all, that there are two test dates that are listed here, one in May, one in February. So the first question we often get is, what if I take the test more than once? What do you do with my scores? We give you the benefit of the doubt. So we will use your higher test score. So in this case, this person's higher test score was in May. They took an earlier test in February. We would use the 680 in doing our evaluation. The score itself is broken out into 4 different component scores and then a total score. The verbal and the quantitative scores are based on a 60-point scale. And you can see that there is a raw score, which is based on the answers to the questions, and then those are scaled into a percentile score. When we are evaluating candidates, we use the raw score in our evaluation because we think that is the most stable score that we can use. Those two component scores, the verbal and the quantitative, are combined together to create the total score, which again, looking at that first line would be a 680 here, and that puts that person in the 82nd percentile. That score is based, as you can see, not on adding together the verbal and the quantitative scores, but there's a conversion scale that GMAT uses to do that. The next part of it is the analytical writing score, and that is also on a 1-point to 6-point scale. And that scale is based on, or that score is based on the analysis in your score, not so much on your writing. A lot of people think of it as a writing sample, and certainly that is part of what we see, but what you are being evaluated on is not necessarily how strong a writer you are, but how strong your analytical skills are. And that's an important thing to be aware of. And then the integrated reasoning question is based on an 8-point scale. And for that, we are still, I'll be quite honest, figuring out what's the best way to integrate that into our evaluation. But it is a score that we have available to us for GMAT takers that we don't necessarily have for GRE takers. I want to mention to you that you can ask questions in the chat as we go along. We're going to save those questions for the end, but one of my colleagues is here today answering those questions online. And then again, at the end, we will have an opportunity for some general questions. Okay, looking at the GRE, you can actually see it's a much simpler score. Again, similar test dates, one in May, one in February. You can see in this case, the person got the same verbal scores, 145 each time, but their quantitative score went up a little bit the second time. The analytical score, again, is on that same 6-point scale. And in this particular case, the person's analytical score went down. This raises an important question that I want to make sure everyone is aware of. As I said, we will use your higher score in doing our evaluation. So for the GMAT, we use the highest total score. For the GRE, we use the highest total score where we add together the verbal and quantitative score. For example, for this person, their May 22nd score, their total score would be 308, and that's the score that we would use to do our evaluation. Does that mean we ignore the score from February? No, but as we report out statistics and as we're doing our evaluation, we give candidates the benefit of the doubt and make sure that we're looking again at that total picture. So if you do decide to take the GRE or the GMAT a second time and you score lower, that's not going to hurt you. I should tell you that the admissions committee would view that in a positive light only because it would allow you to make sure that you were doing your best to put together the best application possible. So your willingness to take the additional step and retake your test score would be viewed positively by the admissions committee. Okay. I want to share with you now a few study tips for both the GMAT and the GRE. So the first thing is we encourage people to establish a baseline. Many of you have taken standardized tests before. If you were educated in the US, you may have taken the SAT or the ACT already. You may have already taken the GMAT or GRE yourself, but if you haven't done that, or if it's been a while since you've taken a standardized test, we encourage you to take a practice exam. And the reason for that is it gives you an idea of what the tests are about, what you can expect as you go through taking the test, and kind of give you a baseline for where you might be scoring in your final test when you take it officially. The second thing we encourage you to do is go ahead and schedule the test. And over the years, I've talked with prospective students who have said, oh, I'm very busy. I don't have the time now to take the test. I'm going to wait until I have more time to schedule it. And I don't know about everybody out there, but I know for me, my life just seems to get busier and busier. And I'm no less busy now than I was a year ago. So what I encourage people to do is go ahead and schedule the test now. Maybe you schedule it for 2.5 months out. And then based on that, you now have a deadline to work towards to get yourself ready for the tests. So I encourage you, go ahead, take that practice exam, get yourself a baseline, and then the next thing would be go ahead and schedule the test so that you've got a timeline for yourself. The second thing I would suggest is making sure you know yourself and your study habits. I often get the question, what is the best way for me to prepare for this test? And I say it really depends on who you are and what you know about yourself. And I'll give you an example. My wife and I both went to graduate school. We approached the testing prep much differently. She's a very disciplined person, more disciplined than I am. She put together her own study plan and she was able to follow it. For myself, where I'm a little bit more easily distracted, it was important for me to have regular check-ins. So I actually signed up for a prep program to be able to make sure that I had regular check-ins to keep myself on track. When you think about getting ready for it, put together a study plan that works for you. That may mean every night for an hour or so before you go to bed. That may be the best thing for you. It may be getting up early in the morning for an hour or so and doing that. You might be someone who needs more concentrated time, so you might want to put aside a few hours on Saturday, a few hours on Sunday. Or you may be the kind of person who really wants to dive in deep, so you set aside 4 or 5 hours on Saturday afternoon and say, this is where I'm going to spend my time prepping for my test. A couple of other options to think about is, or a couple other things to think about. Generally speaking, it's easier to improve your quantitative skills and raise your quantitative score than it is to do your verbal scores. For both the GMAT and the GRE, you're essentially being tested on 10th grade math. A lot of people think it includes things like calculus, which can be a little frightening for some people, but it really is just 10th grade math that you're being asked to do. So it is somewhat more straightforward to increase your skills in that area and demonstrate your proficiency through the online exam. The other thing I wanted to make sure that you knew was that we do offer some discounted and potentially free options in prepping for the GMAT and the GRE, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment when I talk about some of the test prep companies that we've partnered with. And then the last thing I would mention is train for the exam. You want to build your strength and endurance. This is an intense test. It's 3 to 4 hours of time all at once. So when you are doing that prep, make sure you're practicing in real conditions. So when you're taking a test, a practice exam, don't take it over the course of 2 or 3 days. Carve out 3 or 4 hours to sit down and do all parts of the exam at once. That's going to give you both a more realistic assessment of your ability and your readiness for the test. And it's also going to help you build your endurance to be able to do that. And then as you're going through this, as you take additional practice exams, check your progress against your goals. What is the target GMAT or GRE score that you've set for yourself? And how are you doing in your study and your practicing for that? Okay. The last thing I wanted to do is mention quickly, we have partnered with some GMAT prep partners. You can see who they are on the screen, and we have created 2 opportunities to make this a little bit more straightforward for candidates. The first thing is we've negotiated some discounted prices, and if you go to the web address at the bottom of the screen at GMAT-help on our website, you will see what some of those options are. Beyond that, for students who do take a test prep and enroll in our program, we actually have a grant program of up to $800 against the cost of that program. So when you enroll in the UC Davis MBA program, if you do that and you've taken one of these test prep courses, we would be able to provide you a grant of up to $800 towards your winter 2020 tuition in recognition of that additional effort that you've put in. Okay. And the information about that program is also available at that same address at the bottom of the screen. Okay, and then I want to talk about one last aspect of the GMAT before we move on to the TOEFL. And one of the things that we are able to do specifically for our part-time MBA program, so just to be clear, this is not available to applicants to our full-time MBA program, but applicants to our part-time MBA program can apply for a GMAT or GRE waiver. So we've identified 4 different possibilities how a student might qualify. One is if a student has a 3.2 or higher grade point average in a quantitative major. So that would be things like math, science, engineering, and I think you probably can imagine what those might look like yourself, but if you have questions, by all means ask us. The second option would be if a student has at least a 3.0 grade point average plus at least 5 years of professional work experience since finishing their undergraduate degree. The third option would be if you have at least a 3.0 grade point average, plus you've completed a graduate degree or a professional credential, such as the Certified Public Accountancy or Certified Financial Analyst, other options out there as well. And then the last possibility would be if you do have at least 4 years of military experience, and again have that 3.0 grade point average, you would be eligible for a GMAT waiver application as well. And I just want to be clear, because sometimes this isn't, any one of these would qualify you to apply for the GMAT waiver. I also want to make sure you understand these are not automatic, these aren't exemptions, they're waiver applications. So what we would do is review your professional experience from your resume, your academic work from your unofficial transcripts, and then based on that review, we would make a decision about whether we could waive the GMAT for you. And it's a very quick turnaround time. Typically within a few days of you submitting your request, we're able to give you an answer. Okay. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is the TOEFL or IELTS. As you can imagine, our program is taught in English, and we want to make sure that when students are coming into the program, they have proficiency across the board, particularly in English proficiency when they come into the program. So if your native language is not English, we would need to have a TOEFL from you unless you have a degree from a US institution with a minimum of 2 years of full-time study. So for example, if you did a 1-year master's degree in statistics, we would still need to have a TOEFL or IELTS from you. Otherwise, if you don't meet that exemption standard, we would need a TOEFL with a minimum score of 100 or an IELTS score with a minimum of 7.0. So it's a pretty straightforward process, and based on that, we would be happy to work with you and discuss how we use that, what that information is used for. But essentially, we want to make sure that when students are coming into the program, they have the background and experience that they need to be successful academically, as well as in spoken and written English as part of the overall MBA experience. What I'd like to do now is open things up to questions from the group. I've covered a lot of information. I've kept it at a pretty high level, but I also understand that individuals may have deeper questions that they need answers to and maybe delve a little more deeply into some particular topics. So let's open things up for questions. Christopher, do we have anyone?
Indeed we do. Hi everyone, my name is Christopher Wilborg. I'm working here in the admissions team as well. we have a few questions. First, a question came, how often can you take the GMAT and GRE? And that one is that once every 21 days for the GRE, 5 times per year. For the GMAT, it's once every 16 days and 5 times per year, but 8 times in a lifetime, just to cover that. But now a question for Jim. So the first one is, do we accept electronic transcripts as official?
Yes, we do absolutely. If it's through an official electronic transcript transfer system, we would be happy to accept electronic transcripts.
Thank you. And the next one is, do the admissions committee weigh the quant or verbal scores differently in the GMAT or GRE?
I think it's fair to say we look at them a little bit differently. I think with the quantitative score, we look at it very similarly across all candidates, because our expectation is that your quantitative skill level will be level set against all the candidates who are applying in that year. I think for the verbal score, we look at it a little bit differently for someone who is a native English speaker versus someone who is a non-native English speaker. We don't have a formal rubric that we use where we measure and make any kind of adjustment, but for a student where English is not their native language, we obviously have the TOEFL or the IELTS to assess English proficiency, but we do factor in the fact that if someone is not a native English speaker, their scores may not be quite as high on the verbal section.
Thank you. Second one is, so it said for the GMAT waiver, it says 5 years of professional work experience required. Does that mean I have to have that before I'm applying for the waiver or by the time of enrollment?
Really good question. So that 5 years of professional experience, as well as the 4 years of military experience, either of those options, it would be based on at the time of enrollment. So for example, for fall 2019, you would be enrolling in September 2019. So presumably you would have been working full-time starting in September 2014 for the professional experience, or September 2015 if you were looking at military experience.
Perfect. And a final question here is, I noticed that before I submit my application, a score is required. Can I still submit my application and take the GRE score a second time?
Yes, and we have students that do that. They want to get their application in for a particular deadline, and we absolutely appreciate that. If you are planning to take the test an additional time after submitting your application, what we ask you to do is include the test date in your application, in the test score position, and then in the optional essay, include a note that you will be retaking the GMAT or GRE and the date that you'll be doing that. You don't have to do this third thing, but I would recommend just sending a quick email to your associate director, again, either Jessica, Lauren, or Christopher, to let them know that you've submitted your application, but that you are planning to retake your test. Great. Any other questions, folks?
So we just got a new one here. So would it also be helpful to discuss the quantitative portion of your work experience as part of our application?
Absolutely. If it's an important part of the work that you do, that's something you definitely want to share with us. And I say that because what we're looking for is evidence of your success. And if part of your academic success is going to be based on the quantitative work that you're doing in your current role, it's really good for you to share that with us. And be as specific as you can be. I've seen applicants who say, you know, I work with numbers all the time in my job. I do too, but I don't consider myself a statistician by any means. So if you can tell us how you use that work, how you use that quantitative work as part of your job, maybe how frequently, and maybe how those numbers or those results are used by others is very helpful.
And a final question about the TOEFL score. So do I have to score differently in verbal and writing, or do I have a specific score in verbal and writing I need to aim for?
I would say, so the total TOEFL score is on a scale of up to 120, and the minimum score that we're looking for is 100. In a perfect world, you would have completely balanced component scores, so 25 in every section. That's not typically the case. Usually people have more strength in one area than in another. So I would say you don't want to have a huge disparity across your component scores, like a 20 in one and a 30 in the other. But overall, we're looking again at that total picture. So any one component score, whether it's the speaking or listening, the the writing or the reading. You want to try and have a balanced score across that, but there's no minimum score for each of those that we're requiring.
And now back to the retaking of tests. So how do I know if I should retake the GRE?
So if you go to our website, you will see the academic profile of our incoming students. So the average GMAT for our part-time students is typically somewhere between 570 and 590. The typical average for our full-time program is typically somewhere between 670 and 690, and that varies from year to year, as you can imagine. There is also an incredible range of scores around that. Because we do a holistic review of candidates, there's no minimum score that we use to determine whether someone is admissible or not. But as you can imagine, the full-time program, we get applications from all over the world. It's a little more selective than the part-time program, just based on numbers of applications. However, in trying to determine whether you should retake the test or not, I usually tell people to look at it from two dimensions. One would be, how does your score compare to the average of candidates who've applied to our program? And then I also encourage, who've been admitted to the program. And then I would also encourage you to look at it from the point of view of, do you think this is a good representation of your abilities? So for example, if you know that you are very strong quantitatively based either on your previous academic work or the work that you do day to day, but your quantitative score on the GMAT is much lower, you may want to consider retaking it to represent yourself more fully. I would also say that because this is one of many different things that we look at, if the rest of your application is very strong and your GMAT score is a bit below average, I wouldn't worry about it. It's probably not worth retaking. On the other hand, if the rest of your application, or if there's another part of your application that is not as strong as you would like it to be, maybe you had a rough undergraduate experience and your grades and your overall performance aren't as strong, you may want to consider retaking the GMAT to land somewhere above the average for the program you're applying to, just to make sure that you've got some balancing information for the admissions committee to consider.
So we mentioned the GMAT average score as part of the discussion, but we haven't published any average GRE scores. How does that work if I want to know if I should retake the GRE specifically?
So there's a couple ways you can do it. We have right now very few people that are taking the GRE, and we want to make sure that if we publish an average, it's actually representative of the students who are coming in. That has been changing over the past few years, and based on how things look this year, I would anticipate that starting for fall 2019 enrollments, the new classes that come in, we would be able to publish a GRE average as well. In the meantime, what I would encourage you to do, there is a GMAT GRE converter that's available through ets.org, and if you go online to go to Google and type in GMAT GRE converter, it will pop up and it says for school use. You can use it as well, I promise you. But what you can do is enter in your GRE scores, the verbal score and the quantitative score, and it will give you a predicted GMAT value, and then you can compare that to our published GMAT averages, and that will give you a ballpark figure for how close are you to that. Our GMAT average, for example, does not include converted GRE scores. It's strictly based on actual GMAT scores, but that will give you a sense of where does your GRE score fall relative to the rest of the candidates who are applying and being admitted.
Thank you, Jim. That was the last question I have in the chat right now. Do we have any more last-minute questions?
Okay, well, again, thank you guys for joining us today. I know people are busy, so it's always a good thing when things wrap up a little bit early. I just wanted to mention a few next steps as we wrap up. So the first thing is I encourage you to go ahead and start your application. It's a pretty straightforward process. What that does is signals to us that you are interested in the program and serious about it. And for those of you who start by April 17th, we'll be able to process a application fee waiver for you that has a value of $125. The next thing I would encourage you to do is schedule a consultation, again, with Jessica, Christopher, or Lauren. They will be able to talk with you in more detail about your own application and how to best present yourself to the admissions committee. And then the other is we have some upcoming events. If you go to the address at the bottom of our screen, our main website /calendar, you'll see a schedule of what some of those events are. Next week, we will actually have an additional webinar on what we're calling resumes and references. And it's the next part of the application process. And we want to, again, share with you some inside information about how we evaluate candidates and how you can, again, present your best self to the admissions committee. And then a final reminder is we have some upcoming application deadlines. Our next application deadline is April 24th. And then our final regular application deadline for fall 2019 is May 22nd. So there is still time to apply. We have worked with a number of students over the years who have started their application about a month before the application deadline, and they've been able to put together strong applications, and they have been some of our most successful students. So we hope very much that you will be joining us this fall. We again appreciate you spending time with us today, and I just want to again say thank you for spending time with us today. If you have any questions, if you would like to follow up with us in any way, we look forward to hearing from you. But thank you.